Hey everyone, hope you're having a great day today. Today, I want to talk a little bit about how I go about setting up a water treatment or a bath for snakes that have things like stuck shed or maybe a little bite from a feeder like my boy here has, or even things like scale rot and stuff like that in your snakes, and setting up a proper container and bath that's appropriate to help in aiding their healing process. So if that's something that you're looking to learn more about, stick around. I'm Jack. I have Zed with me here today, and this is Python Addiction. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. So today I'm going to talk about setting up a medical-based bath of sorts. And you're probably watching this either to learn in advance what you might need to have something in advance of any problems, or you're having a problem right now and you need to know how to treat your animal for potentially a very slight burn. It could be a bite from a rodent. It could be some type of scale rot. It could be stuck shed. So in any event, what you're trying to do is you're trying to treat the snake for a medical issue that needs soaking. I'm going to say before I go into anything here that you should always seek the advice of a qualified vet first and foremost. As I am not a qualified vet, I'm just going to go over what has worked for me with taking in animals as rescues and treating some of the animals that I actually have of my own when it comes to a couple of the rodent bites that they have received with some of the live feedings that I have done. So the very first thing you're going to need when it comes to setting up a medical bin is some sort of heat source. And I recommend something like either a Zoomed mat, which will work in this instance, or you can use a good piece of normal heat tape from like a rack or something like that that's already set up with some power on it. And I will show you a little bit of footage and a little bit of my whole little area that I have my medical area set up with all of this ready to go. So it's available if I need it. If I get a rescue that comes in that needs treatment, I have a place to do it already set up. But you're going to need some sort of heat source. And you're going to need a heat source to get your water temperature to a specific range depending on the species. For ball pythons, that temperature range is going to be around 88 degrees. And that can vary a couple of degrees lower up to around 90 degrees on the high side. So having a thermostat is going to be essential in making sure that that water stays at that temperature. Because you can get water from the tap or get it to that temperature and set it out, put your snake in it. That temperature of that water is going to acclimate to the surrounding air temperature rather quickly. When you're choosing a thermostat, I recommend this one from Zoomed here. It's the ReptiTemp digital thermostat. Is actually a good one, and it's not that expensive. It's only like $35. You can also use a Herpstat or a VE thermostat. The biggest thing that you want to make sure is that the probe that you're getting is waterproof. The probes for this particular thermostat that I'm using are submersible. Out of all three of those, it's the only one that actually indicates specifically that it is submersible. However, I have tested The probes for both the VE and for the Herbstat, they are both sealed with like an epoxy seal, so they should be okay to put in the water, but I'd rather use something that actually says that it can be put in the water when possible. And with how cheap this is, even though it doesn't have a removable probe, if the probe dies, it's easily replaceable. The probe cost for the VEs and for the Herbstats is almost $20 a piece. The cost of getting another one of these is very comparable. So that's what I recommend as far as the thermostat. And it being an on-off thermostat is going to be perfectly fine for this application. So what you're going to do is you're going to actually take the probe from that thermostat, and I'll show you in a second. We're going to use a bin. This is just a Sterilite 15-quart bin, and I'll tell you this will fit a wide array and size of snakes. It will work really well for most households that have snakes, unless your snake is really, really big. And if it's really, really big, you're going to need a little bit of a bigger tub, but the premise will still stay the same. I can fit my 5.5-foot boa Kratos in this bin without any problem whatsoever. One thing you're going to want to do to prep the bin itself is you're going to want to use something to make holes in it for ventilation, because you are going to be sealing an animal in this enclosure. I use just a simple soldering iron and poke the holes. Heat it up, poke the holes, and let it cool down, and it creates nice uniform holes that don't have sharp edges, so you don't have to worry about anything getting caught on the edges. They're nice and smooth. The other thing you're going to want to do before you actually use it as a medical bin is sterilize it. You can use something like F10, which we'll be talking about in just a couple of minutes, or you can use rubbing alcohol and rinse everything out with hot water, and then just give it a quick wipe with the rubbing alcohol. Let that dry out. You can even use a little bit of bleach water. Rinse everything out. Just a small couple of drops worth of bleach with some water in there. Swish it around. Let it sit in there for a minute. Rinse it out. Dry it out. And then you can use it as the medical bin without a problem. So when you're setting up the probe, and this is another reason why I highly recommend this particular thermostat, is it actually comes with a little suction cup on the end. But you're going to put the probe right on the bottom of the tank or the bin that you're using. Should suction cup right to the end, and then have the wire for the thermostat actually hanging right out. So when you put the top on, it'll just come right out. That's going to keep the temperature track of the water that we're going to be putting in here. When you're filling up the water, we're going to be filling it up to about half the height of whatever snake you're putting into this bin for treatment. If it's a smaller snake like Zed that I had out earlier, you're only going to need half an inch worth of water. If it's a little bit of a larger snake, then you might need 2 inches worth of water, 2.5 inches. Don't put enough water in there to where they're swimming. You want them sitting pretty much on the bottom of the bin all the time, so they're less stress. Them swimming around all the time, because they might be in this bin for a little while. You don't want them to stress out. And when we're going to be setting up the bin, you're not going to be setting the bin completely on the heat mat that you use. So we're only going to be setting it partial to where we can keep the water at a consistent temperature. So I'm going to set this off to the side for a few minutes here. So now, once you have your thermostat, once you have your bin, once you have your heat mat set up, now we have to look at the actual treatment process and what to do about the water itself. So first things first, you're going to want to put your animal into the bin without any treatments to the water that I'm going to discuss for about 30 minutes. And that's going to allow them some time to drink some of the water that's in the bin. Generally speaking, they'll try to take their drink within that first 30 minutes-ish, and that'll be less exposure to what we're going to be putting into the water to medicate the water, so to speak, to create a more sterile solution that they're going to sit in to help keep whatever skin-based issue they're having clean. So after you've let them sit in the water for, like I said, around 30 minutes, one of the first things that I suggest adding, and you can use any one of these products, don't mix them together when you're doing a treatment. All you need is any one of them. My normal first go-to, and it's leaking on me today, of course, is iodine. It works absolutely wonders, and all you need is a few drops into the water. And here's a little clip here that you can watch. I'm putting in 5 drops into this little cup of water and stirring it up. It's almost the same color as this table when you look at it after I put it in there. You want a very light solution when you're using the water. And now I'm going to get paper towels to wipe my hands off because I've got iodine. And now that I've taken care of that problem, the next thing that I suggest using, and I was discussing this for sterilizing the bin itself, is you can use F10. And when you're using F10, you just want to put about 1 to 2 milliliters per 32 ounces worth of water. So it's a little bit of a more difficult, a little bit more of a precise measurement. But both of these so far that I've gone over, if your snake drinks a little bit of it, it's perfectly fine. It's not going to be harmful to your snake if they drink a little bit of it or get a little bit of it into their mouth or anything like that. So it's just important to keep the ratios for the solution very, very, very dilute. What we're trying to do is create a more sterile environment to prevent bacterial growth, to help if there is an actual wound, for any of the wounds to get cleaned out a little bit to keep the bacteria from creating infection and the like. And if you're doing a soak for just sheds, you don't need any of this. You can just keep them in that water for an hour and a half. It's temperature regulated, so you're going to be keeping that temperature, and I'll tell you how to set the temperature, the exact ranges when you're using the thermostat in just a few minutes. But you're going to keep, everything is going to be regulated, so they'll be fine to soak if it's just a shed issue for a little while without a problem. You can add any of these into the solution, into that water, if it's necessary. I had one rescue that came in a while back that had a regular shed issue, and I needed to add a little bit of the iodine for every shed just to make sure that they didn't get any infection or anything like that while they were shedding, because their shed would stick and it would pull on the scales even with very high humidity. So there's different issues that you might have to handle, so you have to make sure that you know your animal and you're following your medical advice from your vet when it comes to doing these types of treatments. The next thing that you can use, and I get it by the gallon, chlorhexidine. This is a great sanitizing agent. I use this in conjunction with the F10 to make my spray that I use to sterilize all of my bins and wipe everything out for everything for the hatchling bin, for all of my hatch trays, the bins that I use for all of the incubator stuff. Everything, I use this with some distilled water and some of the F10 to create my cleaning solution. But you can also use this in very dilute proportions in the soak. And as you see in this little clip, it's a very, very, very pale, light blue when you're diluting it. I'm only putting 1/3 of an ounce, if that, into that cup to show you just how the color change is when it comes to looking at how strong or how weak it is. Use color for this or the iodine to actually see where your levels are. Iodine, very weak solution. If you're using chlorhexidine, very weak solution. Now, this is about $30 for the big gallon. The iodine, you can get that on Amazon, and I'll have links to everything in the description below, for like $5 or $6 for a bottle. The F10 runs at around 20 for a bottle. But there's something that's in your house that you can also use that most people have already available. And we'll see if I can find it. Found it. Table salt. You can actually make a salt solution, and many of you are thinking, oh, I've done that for a sore throat, I've done that for a mouthwash. You can actually make a very dilute saltwater solution as a soak for your snake. You're only going to want to put for that whole bin maybe 1/4 of a teaspoon to a teaspoon at most for a larger snake. Very, very, very dilute saltwater solution. You're just making a saline solution essentially. And you soak your animal right in that. So again, the biggest thing to take away from this is that you're creating, number one, a warm, temperature controlled environment to soak your snake in. You don't want to just put them into a bath and then walk away and it get cool, because that's not going to help promote healing. Ball pythons, their optimal healing range, their white blood cells and everything in their body kicks in when they're at their basking rate, at their optimal hot side rate of around 88 degrees. That's when they do their digestion the best, and that's why they're generally on the warm side when they're doing their shedding. That's when their system is optimal. So that's what we're trying to promote when it comes to like ball pythons, when it comes to boas. With colubrids, you're probably going to want the temperature set down just a little bit smaller. And that's what we're going to get into now, is just what do you set your temperature ranges for that thermostat. If you want a approximately 88 degree water, you're going to set that thermostat for around 86 on the low and set it for 88 on the high. Give it like a 2 to 3 degree range, and you can set it 85 to 88. That's fine. Because it's an on-off thermostat, number one, when you turn on it, it's going to ramp up. It's going to heat up for a little while for when it heats up your actual heat mat. And then when it kicks off, that heat mat's still going to generate a little bit of heat for a couple of extra moments. So you might boost up another degree with the waters, with how much heat the water is holding in. And you also have to compensate for the fact that you have an animal in the water. Their body heat is going to also partially regulate the temperature of the water that they're in. And that's what you're going to want to get, is you're going to want their body temperature to essentially be the same temperature as the water. And that's what we're promoting by keeping the water at that optimal range. And that's going to keep them at that optimal range to help promote the healing. Colubrids, set it down more to like 83 for the low side and 85 or 86 for the hot side. Again, dependent on the species. Boas and ball pythons, which I can speak of having them myself and having treated several rescues using this method, you can leave them in there for days if you have the temperature at the right setting without any problem. You are going to want to watch the water and watch the animal to make sure that if they go to the bathroom in the water, that you're changing the water immediately. You don't want them to stay in dirty water. So you're going to want to make sure to do that. And every time you change the water, sanitize the bin completely. Like I said before, using some of the F10, if that's what you're using, or a little bit of bleach water. Make sure it's nice and clean. Put fresh water in there. When you're putting the fresh water in there, make sure that it gets up to temperature before you put the animal back into the water. Don't put them into water that's on the cool side. When it comes to the water itself, you can use tap water. That's perfectly acceptable and perfectly fine. If you don't have tap water that's drinkable, then I would suggest using either filtered water, reverse osmosis water, or distilled water as the water to be able to put them in. Because again, when you're first putting them in there, you're giving them that chance to drink before you're actually putting any of the other agents into the water to actually create the sterile solution that they're going to be sitting in. So that's basically a nutshell version of what I do to set up a container and setup. And here's the video that I was going to show you of how I have my little medical area actually set up. Very simple, very Spartan. I have a travertine countertopped area. I have a whole 2-foot section worth of heat tape. As you see, I have a couple of tiles off to the side. I actually do cover up part of that heat tape that I'm not using if I have to use the bin and I'm only putting one bin in there. But I use a 2-foot section of tape so I can have 2 bins going if I need to. And this is something that you can have at home to where you have a nice little bin already established with everything you need in it. Put a little bottle of the iodine in the bin. Put the thermostat in the bin. If you get a small enough heat mat, put the heat mat right into the bin. If you get one like the heat tape, like what you just saw in the video, you can actually go to like Reptile Basics and order like a 1-foot piece by 1-foot piece, a 12-inch piece of heat tape that's already terminated on the end. So you have the perfect size piece of heat tape, a nice little square that you can set the bin on. And when you're setting the bin on it, you only want to put the bin around 1/2 to 3/4 of the way onto the heat tape. You don't need to put it directly all the way over it. It's not needed. It will heat up the water relatively quickly if the water is at or around that temperature. So when you're filling up the water itself, if you're using tap water, turn it on towards the hotter side. Obviously, make sure that it's not too hot. I use a temperature gun most of the time to check the temperature of the water, as well as using the probe, because the probe is going to give me a pretty accurate measurement, but I like to use the temperature gun just as a assurance to make sure that the thermostat is set properly. Treatment time periods. Most of the time, I set aside a good 2-hour block for treatment, depending on what it's for. Sometimes 45 minutes, the 30 minutes for the soak so they can get the drink, and then a 15-minute soak in the actual solution, 30-minute soak, that type of thing. You don't really need to stretch it out much more than an hour, hour and a half per soak, not counting the initial period to where the water is untreated. And then repeat it as either directed by your veterinarian or qualified professional. I generally will do most soaks every 3 to 5 days, depending what I'm treating for. If it's a more severe like burn or severe rot of some sort on the belly or something like that, I might do treatments a little bit more often to make sure that they're not getting exposure or having the bacterial growth or anything like that. And this treatment process works in conjunction with making sure that the enclosure they're going back into is also clean. So while you're doing a soaking type of treatment in general, unless it's just a soak for removing stuck shed, you're going to want to make sure that the enclosure is also clean and Spartan on paper or paper towel, hide, water bowl, and that's about it, to make sure that there is very little in their enclosure that can be potentially introducing bacteria, making sure to keep those substrate and everything clean on a regular basis while you're going through the treatment process. So if you have any questions on this or comments or suggestions when it comes to how you do it, if you're a breeder or somebody that does rescue, how have you done soaks? Let me know in the comments below, as I do read every comment, and it's those types of things that help me decide what I'm going to do coverage on and what topics I'm going to talk about each week. So if you liked this information, hit that like button. And if you've made it this far into the video and you haven't done this yet, please subscribe to the channel. And while you're at it, click that notification icon, as that will let you know when I put out new content. But until next time, I'm Jack, and this is Python Addiction.